Hi, everyone. For the next few days, we will look at the most important week of the most important person who ever lived, Jesus of Nazareth. All four gospel writers tell the story of Jesus' final week, varying on the details they felt were important. And when read together, we kind of get a full and clear picture of what occurred that week. And it begins on Monday. Jesus had entered Jerusalem the day before on what we now call Palm Sunday to shouts of Hosanna. The people loved him, and messianic expectations were at a fever pitch. And so on Monday, Jesus leaves the house of his good friends Mary, Martha, and Lazarus in Bethany and returns to Jerusalem and goes to the temple. Now, the temple complex was enormous. They say it might have been about the size of 12 soccer fields with several courts. The inner court, or Holy of Holies, was only allowed to be entered by the high priest on the Day of Atonement to ask forgiveness of sins for himself and the people. Then there was the court of priests, the court of Israel, the court of women, and then the outer court of Gentiles. Now, this outer court of the Gentiles is where vendors sold their goods. The temple served many purposes, including a house of prayer, a national bank, and the only place sacrifices could be offered. And for that reason, there needed to be vendors on the site. See, everyone who came had to offer a sacrifice for the Passover meal. And rather than bring it with them for lots of reasons, they would purchase it at the temple because then they were sure that it was pure and unblemished. And in Mark 11, beginning in verse 15, we read, "On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, 'Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you have made it a den of robbers.' The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because a whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city." In one of the more dramatic events early in the week, Jesus proceeded to the courtyards around the temple, overthrew the tables of the money changers, and then drove out those involved in the buying and selling of sacrificial animals. He takes special aim at the pigeon traders who were ripping off the poor. This young rabbi, who yesterday had the whole city in a patriotic uproar, today stormed into the very temple precinct itself and created chaos. Doves flapping, men shouting, women scrambling after the rolling coins. This fellow from Galilee once again stirring up trouble. But so what if Jesus turns over a table or two in one part of the complex? It's not going to make much of a difference given the size of the place, is it? So why did he do it? What exactly has gotten him so upset? Well, these merchants set up shop in the court of the Gentiles, making it useless as a place of prayer due to the hustle and bustle of the buying and the selling. Jesus can't stand that these traders would take advantage of people simply trying to worship. See, not only were they overcharging the people, it became all but impossible for the Gentiles to spend any time in worship because this was the only place they were allowed to pray. Jesus is making the point that he didn't come just for the religious elite, just for the Jews alone. He came for everyone, for all people. And that includes the sick, the poor, the marginalized, the women, the children, and the Gentiles. And so what we see in Jesus is not violence, but what is known as righteous anger. Jesus is angry because God's house of prayer had become a place of extortion and greed, a place of showboating and corruption. In clearing the temple, Jesus is making a critical statement about the purpose of the house of God and the calling of God's people. And so he disrupts the status quo, and that disrupts the folks in charge, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, who were just itching to find reasons to have Jesus arrested. And after reading this, I was thinking how much Monday of Holy Week parallels our individual journeys of faith. I mean, if Jesus came today and looked at the temple of God in me and you, would he have the same reaction as he did in Jerusalem with the corrupt merchants? Would he get angry at what he saw in us? Or would he be proud? In other words, if the Lord did an inspection of our hearts this morning, what would he find? Because you see, there are times when we too need to clean house, make changes, stand up for things that aren't right, the way Jesus did. Truth is, if we don't become angry when we see images of suffering children, if we don't feel some sort of rage when preventable tragedies occur, if we don't feel compelled to act, then something has gone terribly wrong with us. Because when Jesus is in charge of our lives, many things we used to do, say, want, are no longer okay. And so, my brothers and sisters, as we begin our journey with Jesus this final week of his earthly life, let's consider where we are in our walk of faith and how we can become more compassionate, more loving, more selfless, more peaceful, more like Jesus. I know it isn't always easy, but don't give up. Keep trying. Well, it's been quite a start to the week, don't you think? Jesus knows the end is coming, and he will hold nothing back. The common people love him and what they are seeing. Jesus is shaking things up and setting things right, just as the Messiah was expected to do. But his actions seem to challenge the Jewish religious leaders once again, and the chief priests and scribes desperately begin looking for a way to destroy Jesus. And by his actions today, Jesus has pretty much sealed his death sentence. The religious authorities have had enough of this Jesus. He must die. They just need to figure out a way to do it. Well, after all of the hoopla of the day is over, Scripture tells us Jesus left Jerusalem and returned to Bethany again, probably staying back at the house of his friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. The house and place he loved and felt most welcomed in. I hope he rested well. See you tomorrow. Love you. Peace.